Hey guys, tonight we begin with soft lamps, a couch that doesn't fight back, and an ancient sky that still feels warm. If you're here to drift, welcome. If you're here to learn something and then immediately forget it in a haze of good sleep, even better. We're going to float down the Nile at a pace that would make a snail file a formal complaint. This is a bedtime boat. We will be very polite to time. So, Isis and Hathor. Two names that sound like bells, or like the gentle clink of bracelets in a temple courtyard. People sometimes imagine them as static statues in museums, unblinking, dusty. But in the world that made them, they were vivid. They were powers, not just stories, not chase scenes, not jump scares. More like the feeling you get when someone lights frankincense and the room becomes a little kinder. That's the speed we're using. Isis first, the archetypal wife, mother, magician, and problem solver. She is the person you text when your life has gone sideways. She answers. She has receipts, remedies, and a cloak for traveling at night. She is the one who knows the secret name of the sun. Of course she does. Her myth with Osiris is the famous one. We won't be dramatic about it because we're aiming for REM sleep, not adrenaline. Set, the brother with a taste for chaos and questionable party etiquette, destroys Osiris. The body is broken and scattered. Isis goes looking, because of course she does. She's patient. She's thorough. She collects every piece, stitches fate back together, and coaxes breath into it with the kind of love that is less fireworks and more sunrise. In time, she conceives Horus. This isn't a horror tale. It's a ritual about repair. It's a low hum of persistence. It's a promise that broken things can become new again if you know the words and you keep the candles lit. Hathor, meanwhile, is a different melody. Think music, laughter, dancing, and the bright comfort of wine that was probably stronger than the temple ledger admits. She's joy that doesn't need permission. She's the soft cow's ear, the curve of a golden horn, the sistrum rattle that priests used to keep the universe on beat. Hathor is beauty as a stabilizing force. Not shallow beauty, but that feeling when a room is arranged just so and you exhale without noticing. She is the personification of, we can fix this if we remember how to be human. We'll go slow. We'll let the incense burn down. We'll keep things mild. Back to Isis. If you ever hear that Egyptian queens wore a throne on their head, that's Isis. Her crown is literally the hieroglyph for throne. The symbolism is not subtle. She legitimizes kings. She wraps the state in maternal magic and tells it to sit up straight. If Hathor is the party where everyone behaves, Isis is the family meeting where no one can wiggle out of their responsibilities. She knows your middle name.
In temple walls and papyri, Isis is great of magic. The ancient word is Heka. It doesn't mean stage tricks. It means the power stitched into creation. Egyptians didn't divide the universe into natural and supernatural with hard lines. Heka was how the sun crossed the sky, how bread rose, how a river remembered to flood. It was how life worked when it was working. And Isis, inconveniently for patriarchy, was better at it than almost anyone. Let's glide over to Hathor's house for a minute. You'll recognize it by the columns with her face. Serene, square jaw, cow ears, a gaze that looks like, I hope you've eaten. Dendera, her great temple, is like a stone lullaby. There are star ceilings, zodiac carvings, and rooms that feel designed for late afternoon. The sistrum percussion was her signature. Priests and priestesses shook it, and the tiny metal discs shivered the air on purpose. The sound was for taming anxiety. It was a polite shh to chaos, a sonic cup of chamomile tea. Hathor has a second side, though. She's the Eye of Ra, that blazing feminine force that can flip into a protective lioness if the mood requires. People think of her as sweet. She is. And she is also the one you want when something gets out of hand. The famous pacification story, where anger is gentled with red beer, comes from this eye tradition. The moral is less drink more and more turn down the temperature. Egyptian myth is very into mood regulation. Therapy goals, but with gold jewelry. You can see how both goddesses ended up very busy. One stabilizes rulers, mothers the air, makes the spell work, and retrieves what's lost. The other keeps the people cheerful, the music alive, the wedding dancing on beat, and the miners in Sinai feeling seen. Yes, Sinai. Hathor is Lady of Turquoise. In the desert mines of Serabit el-Qadim, worshippers carved her name, offered little scarabs, and asked for safe returns and decent wages, if we're being real. The turquoise was gorgeous. The work was not. Hathor was there to soften the edges. Let's drift toward palaces, since royal mess is kind of why we're all here. A lot of kings preferred to be Horus on earth. That was the brand. Falcon crown, steady jawline if the sculptor liked them, and a policy agenda of please keep the river on schedule. Queens took goddess roles, often Isis or Hathor, to make the royal duo read as cosmically in sync. You'll see nursing scenes carved in stone, Hathor breastfeeding the king. Comforting, symbolic, and frankly, an HR headache. The message lands: the rulership is nourished by divine feminine power. It cannot function without it. Everyone signed the memo. In New Kingdom tombs, especially in the Valley of the Queens, Isis and Hathor show up like guardian aunties. Nefertari's tomb is the high point here. She's the beloved wife of Ramses II, the one with the makeup that still looks fresh after 3,000 years. On the walls, she's embraced by Isis. She's welcomed by Hathor. She isn't groveling, she's participating. She wears the horned crown sometimes, the throne at others. She isn't just wife or mother, she's queen as office, queen as cosmic function. Of course she was. We can pause here and acknowledge the awkward fact that real royal life wasn't a hymn. Even the pretty tombs had backstories with stress. Ankhesemenun is a good example, and she's relevant because the cults of Isis and Hathor were exactly where a nervous queen would go to think. She was the wife of Tutankhamun, likely a teenage marriage, likely pressured by politics. When Tutankhamun died around 1323 BCE and no healthy heir was around, she had to navigate a court full of older men with agendas. Somebody wrote to the Hittites asking for a foreign prince to marry. Most scholars think it was her. The Hittite prince was killed en route. Not exactly a spa day.
Imagine Ankhesemenun at a private shrine. Isis in polished stone, hands open, throne crown gleaming. The queen places bread and beer. She speaks the ritual words that are older than anyone's grandparents. She asks for continuity, for protection, for a plan. It's not a Marvel scene, it's quiet. It's repetitive. It's effective in the way rituals are when you've done them so many times they move your breath for you. The myth of Isis gathering pieces becomes a method. You pick up the parts you still have, you reassemble there, you listen for which piece comes next. Let's flow back to Hathor at Dendera, because festivals are cozy and we need some soft light. Each year, when the Nile settled after the flood, when fields looked like they might forgive the sun, Hathor sailed south to visit Horus at Edfu in the beautiful reunion. The goddess's cult statue rode a bark with a shrine, carried by priests, escorted by music, followed by a crowd that understood how to be festive without being obnoxious. The reunion was joy as policy. Cities literally had to be brought back into alignment by celebration. If you manage joy well, you produce grain, healthy babies, eager traders, fewer fights. If you mismanage it, you get sulking nobles and bad harvests. Hathor is the HR department for happiness. She brings wine,
and also performance metrics. Isis had her own reach that spilled beyond Egypt. In the late period and then into Greek and Roman times, she collected new titles the way some people collect skincare samples. Isis who hears prayers, Isis of 10,000 names, Isis of the sea, protecting sailors who would prefer not to drown today, thanks. Her cult traveled because it was useful. If you're a merchant sailing from Alexandria to Piraeus, you want a goddess who handles logistics. In Roman port towns, you get altars to Isis. In Pompeii, you had a full temple with frescoes of priests performing. After Vesuvius, the temple was rebuilt. That's devotion with a shovel. The last great Egyptian temple of Isis at Philae outlived almost everything. Its rituals kept going into the 6th century CE, long after the old gods were officially out of office. Pilgrims still came, priests still tended statues. That tells you something about a goddess who covers fertility, mourning, magic, kingship, and safe travel. It's a very thorough customer service model. We can check in on Cleopatra here, because why pretend we weren't going to? Cleopatra VII, last of the Ptolemies, made Isis her public face. It wasn't just a fashion choice, it was statecraft in a world where Greek rulers were trying to convince Egyptian subjects they were legitimate. The Ptolemies did the sibling marriage thing, because why not double down on the weird, and crowned themselves with diadems heavy enough to cause migraines. Cleopatra minted coins bearing the Isis knot and wore the horned crown when it suited her. She did ceremonies that made her read as Isis incarnate. Did she seduce Caesars with eyeliner? Not really. She brought a whole civilization's goddess branding to the meeting. That level of packaging tends to land. This is a good moment to talk Sistrums in more detail, because that little rattle is a thesis disguised as a musical instrument. The sistrum came in 2 main styles, naos-shaped frames and round-topped ones, with metal rods strung across. Shake it, and you get a bronze shimmer. The sound was meant to calm the god. It was used by priestesses and priests in Hathor and Isis cults. It showed up in women's hands on tomb walls. If you've ever shaken a key ring while a cat stares at you like you're ridiculous, imagine the gods as affectionate but distractible cats. The sistrum kept them happy. It's not a perfect metaphor. It's fine. We're not taking a quiz. There's also the Manat necklace, a counterbalance weight on a beaded strand flipped and swung as a percussion object. You see it in reliefs, a priestess holding the Manat behind her back, flipping it with a little smile that reads like, "I know how to do this." These were tools of mood. Egyptians took the emotional state of the divine seriously. If Hathor was content, the Nile cooperated. If the eye was angry, get the red beer.
We can whisper a few details from texts without getting fussy. The pyramid texts, those old kingdom spells scratched inside pyramids to help a king ascend, already mention Isis nursing, mourning, and protecting. The coffin texts spread that assistance to non-royals in Middle Kingdom times, because honestly, heaven is more fun with company. In the Book of the Dead, which is a modern name for a loose compendium of spells, Isis is the one who helps the deceased's heart not freak out when it's weighed. Hathor appears as the Lady of the Sycamore, offering water and bread from a tree to the thirsty dead. It's domestic. It's comforting. It's exactly how they imagined eternity. A shade of the afternoon, a cup of cool water, a goddess who is also a good hostess. Let's slide over to daily life. A woman hoping for a child might wear an amulet of Isis nursing Horus, called Isis lactans, tiny and sweet, the kind of piece you touch absent-mindedly like a worry stone. At Dendera, women scratched graffiti asking Hathor for favor in love or safe childbirth. The graffiti isn't formal, it's human. It's please and thank you. In Memphis or Thebes, you might find a little clay figurine left on a shrine shelf with a note to the goddess tucked in like a grocery list. People consulted oracles too. Yes, Egyptians liked a good oracle. A statue would be carried on a bark, and it would choose directions by the way bearers moved, or a question would be answered with a bob of the figure. Isis had oracles that were more approachable than some divine hotlines.
If you needed advice on whether to marry Kamiwesit with his suspiciously shiny sandals, you could ask. The goddess might say yes. Or not. Maybe she didn't like the sandals. Hathor's domain of love and music naturally spilled into work. Musicians and dancers often served her. In tomb scenes, the party bits show female musicians playing harps and lutes, with perfume cones melting on their wigs. The cones were likely scented wax or fats. They look like ice cream, and yes, everyone has made that joke. The symbolism is more pleasant atmosphere than melting dessert. Hathor liked a good playlist. So did her humans. Let's be gentle with politics for a second, but keep it human. Hatshepsut, earlier than Cleopatra, 18th dynasty, held power as a king. She styled herself in male regalia, but also leaned into divine feminine affiliation. Hathor and Isis appear in her monuments as validators. At Deir el-Bahri, her elegant terraced temple, Hathor greets the queen with the affection of a patron. Hatshepsut's story isn't tragedy, it's persistence and administrative excellence. Still, when she vanished from official narrative later, someone hammered her name from walls. The goddesses on those walls endured. The faces of Hathor on the columns stay serene. Stone keeps its opinion. We can slide back to the Greek and Roman lens briefly. Plutarch, writing in the 1st century CE, tried to explain Egyptian religion to his readers in De Isidae and Osiridae. He filtered it through philosophy. He called Isis the wisdom nature, the good mother of all things. People often quote him like he was on-the-ground reporter. He wasn't. He was doing what philosophers do, organizing cosmic gossip into a system. Still, he captured the sense that Isis was not a niche goddess. She was everything adjacent. She was the operator at the switchboard. She put calls through. And then there's Philae again, because that island deserves a second visit. Set in the Nile south of Aswan, ringed by hills that turn rose at sunset, it housed a complex of temples where Isis remained very alive, cult-wise, long after the empire became something else. When Justinian closed it in the 6th century, it took persuasion, politics, and probably size. The priests took the statues away. The last sanctuary dimmed. The quiet that followed isn't a dramatic silence. It's a slow fade like the end of a song you didn't want to end yet, but the melody never fully disappears. It lingers in the walls.
Let's float into material culture again, because artifacts tuck stories into corners. In household shrines, Isis sometimes appears as a woman with the throne crown. Sometimes she wears Hathor's horns and sun disk. It's not a mistake. Deities in Egypt blur edges, share hats, merge functions. Syncretism isn't a bug, it's the default setting. If a goddess protects mothers, travels at night, and accepts music, she might wear whatever crown expresses the task at hand. That flexibility is very Egyptian. If you've ever used a wooden spoon as a hammer because it was closer, you get it. Hathor's iconography has its own cozy details. Cow-headed standards, the Naus with her face, the Hathor pillars at Dendera with that square visage and a tight little smile. She's also Mother of the West, welcoming souls to the necropolis. You get scenes of a gigantic cow emerging from the mountain, offering passage. The dead person looks tiny and grateful. The mountain looks like a cake that someone knows how to slice perfectly. It's all very considered. If you need more human weirdness, and gently we always do, consider Ptolemaic family dynamics. Greek Macedonian rulers trying to be Egyptian kings sometimes chose sibling marriage as a branding exercise. The results were complicated. It made for neat dynastic charts and awkward dinner conversations. Cleopatra II married her brother Ptolemy VI, then later another brother, Ptolemy VIII, who also married her daughter. That's a whole group chat you don't want to scroll. The family kept Isis-like mother imagery in circulation to stabilize the situation. If you lean on the goddess who legitimizes heirs, people might forget the heir is also technically your nephew and your husband, because why not triple down?
Let's check in with seduction, because our title promised it, and we do keep our promises, just very gently. In Egyptian usage, we're not mainly talking about flirtation with smoky eyes. We're talking about attractive force. Isis persuades reality to behave. Hathor persuades people to stop being mad by making joy more attractive than anger. The seductive power is magnetism that pulls order together. If that also helps with actual romantic situations, Egyptians weren't mad about it. Love spells existed. Papyrus fragments include instructions that are sometimes sweet, sometimes questionable. Make so-and-so burn with desire is a recurring theme. The gods are invoked as cosmic witnesses. People did magic with beeswax and herbs and string, and then hoped the gods weren't too offended. The love gods, Hathor, Isis, also Bes and Taweret for household matters, show up as intermediaries. It's mostly, please bring them to me, with the emotional nuance of a 20-something at 2 a.m. Hathor's drinking festivals deserve a yawn and a smile. In some places, the Festival of Drunkenness honored how the eye was pacified. Participants drank beer dyed red to mimic blood, and then took naps, more or less. Music, laughter, then sleep on temple floors under stars painted on ceilings. The morning after likely involved a lot of water and a little regret. But cosmically, it was a reset. People reenacted inebriation as a safe ritual to keep the dangerous mood away. The goddess liked joy. So did they. They practiced it annually like civic maintenance. Back to queens, because their portraits carry the goddess blueprint. Ti, powerful wife of Amenhotep III and mother of Akhenaten, sat for a tiny ebony head with a crown of solar discs and horns. It's not labeled Hathor, but the vibe is there. Ti was famous for her poise and for politely writing to foreign kings like she was confirming a lunch reservation. Queens who knew how to align with Hathor and Isis didn't need to shout. They had a way of making decisions feel inevitable. The gods liked inevitability. It keeps schedules tidy.
This is a good place to whisper about the god's wife of Amun, a title that rose to political power later. It's more Amun's domain than Isis or Hathor, but the template is the same. A woman holding ritual power as the human embodiment of a divine partner. In the Third Intermediate Period and Late Period, these women ran estates, issued decrees, and made priests listen. They walked into temple courts with that slow, measured pace that says, "We are very much in charge." The goddesses set the precedent. The office borrowed the tone. Let's not forget the everyday men who also joined these cults. Priests of Hathor were not all women. Men shook sistrums too, and managed festivals, and sang hymns that read like soft R&B lyrics if you squint. It's slightly charming imagining a very serious middle-aged priest delicately shaking a rattle with a face like he is solving tax issues. He's maintaining cosmic harmony. That's accounting too. As the Greek and Roman worlds adopted Isis, the goddess picked up sailor gear. In inscriptions called eratologies, self-proclamations, Isis says things like, "I invented seafaring," which is a flex and also adorable. She protected ships, rescued the lost, and handled storms like a manager who keeps a calm voice when the projector fails. In each port, local people mapped their needs onto her skill set. That's how you last. You adapt without losing your center. Isis was very good at brand extensions. Let's take one more slow lap through Philae at dusk. The quarries left scars on the granite islands nearby. The water moves like silk. Columns throw long stripes on the stone. In the hypostyle hall, reliefs show Isis with Hathor's crown, with Horus on her knee, with a sistrum in hand. The cult statue, once hidden inside inner rooms, would have been small enough to carry, but significant enough to set a city's mood. People brought petitions on ostraca, little flakes of limestone with handwriting that looks like it could be your friend's, if your friend wrote in hieratic, "Please heal my child. Please bring my husband back from Nubia. Please let the storehouse not flood this year." Practical magic, soft prayers, bread and beer, a flower, a song. Seduction here is the universe leaning toward life.
It's the promise that if you hold the thread and keep drawing it through, the tapestry will show a pattern again. Isis holds the thread at funerals and births. Hathor plays the rhythm people can follow. Kings and queens stand between them, ideally with the self-awareness to accept help. Sometimes they have it, sometimes they do not. The goddesses remain calmly available either way. It's graceful. It's also a tiny bit passive-aggressive, which is comforting. We can slide for a minute into small domestic shrines. A family might have a wooden naos on a shelf, a little cabinet with 2 doors. Inside, a figure of Isis, maybe blue-wigged, gold jewelry painted, holding Horus. Next to her, a Hathor face plaque or a menot tucked in like a bookmark. On festival days, doors open. On ordinary evenings, somebody might light a lamp, set down a fig, say a sentence. Children learn the names and the tone. You don't shout at Isis. You set out bread and say thank you. You don't pretend around Hathor. She can tell when the music is forced.
In case you're collecting timelines for your bedside mental shelf, here's your gentle version. Isis is attested before 2400 BCE in the pyramid texts, Hathor even earlier, as a cow goddess linked to the sky and mothering. Their cults expand, absorb, and integrate through Middle and New Kingdom. They become portable, citizen-friendly, and extremely exportable in the late period. They ride Hellenistic networks like seasoned travelers. By the Roman imperial period, you can be from Spain and write a hymn to Isis without seeming odd. The temple at Philae is closed around 537 to 550 CE, but a lot of small household practices keep going under new names, as they tend to do. You didn't hear that part from me. If you want a small object to imagine holding, picture an amulet of the Tayet knot, the knot of Isis. It looks like an ankh with the arms drooping downward, or a sash tied with ends hanging. People wore it for protection and for blood-related rituals. It shows up in burial wrappings. The red of it mattered. It tied things together. Sometimes you don't need a big story. You need a knot. We can end this first stretch among the Sinai Hills, under a sky where stars behave. At Sarabat el-Qadim, the little shrine to Hathor, the Lady of Turquoise, sits on a plateau. Expedition workers chiseled stele asking for mercy from rough work, and for extra turquoise, obviously. They carved their names, which is a surprisingly modern urge. I was here, please remember. They offered little cows and sistrums and wedged eyes. They went home with pockets full of blue stones and maybe an amulet for a child. Hathor's job there wasn't to make the mining soft. It was to make the people feel seen. So, Isis and Hathor. Seduction as magnetism, as emotional intelligence, as daily maintenance of a fragile order. Queens leaned on them. Merchants whispered to them. Musicians shook their names into the air. The gods stayed not because fear is effective customer retention, but because tenderness is. This is a civilization that wrote instructions for how to be gentle to a god. That's exactly the energy you want when you're trying to sleep. Let's drift. We'll pick up the thread again soon. Into court intrigue softened by goddess branding, into festivals that saved harvest calendars, into the long afterlife of 2 names that never learned how to leave. For now, the sistrum stops. The lamps burn low. The Nile keeps moving. You don't have to.
Okay, lights low again. Blankets fixed. If the cat insists on being a sphinx, let it. We're back on the Nile, where the breeze is a rumor and time minds its manners. Part 1 set the mood. Part 2 keeps it. We're still with Isis and Hathor, the queens of gentle gravity. The plan is simple. Float through palaces and temples, peek at royal lives that needed a lot of goddess PR, and keep the humor dry enough to pass inspection. No cliffhangers, no loud drums, just that steady sistrum shimmer, like someone shaking sunshine in a bronze frame. Let's start with the queen who made competence look ceremonial.
Hatshepsut. 18th dynasty, officially a king, actually a woman. She didn't kick down doors, she redecorated them. Her temple at Deir el-Bahri, those terraces tucked into cliffs like stacked trays, has a chapel to Hathor that reads like a lullaby carved in limestone. Hathor appears as a cow emerging from the western hills, eyes deep and kind, offering protection to the ruler who knew a thing or two about stabilizing the mood. Hatshepsut let the goddess do the talking. Suckling scenes, embraces, the whole iconographic hug. The message is murmured, not shouted. The throne stands because Hathor nurses it. Try arguing with a cow goddess who can stare you down without blinking. Hatshepsut held the title God's Wife of Amun before her kingship, which positioned her exactly where Egyptian religion liked powerful women, close to the engine room, ritual partner to a major deity, keeper of keys. The chapels show her in intimate contact with Hathor's sweetness and Sekhmet's severity, because Egypt believed in balance with teeth. She built, traded down the Red Sea to Punt, and ran festivals with the quiet energy of someone who brings snacks and a spreadsheet. When a later regime tried to erase her, Hathor's faces on the columns at Deir el-Bahri stayed very calm about it. Stone keeps score even when it smiles. From Hatshepsut's clean lines, we slide into the pleasant overload of Amenhotep III in Queen T. Think high New Kingdom luxury. Colossal statues that decide you're the ant. Hundreds of lioness statues of Sekhmet commissioned because, well, he liked his protective goddesses plentiful. He celebrated multiple Sed festivals without waiting for the traditional 30-year mark because why not throw more jubilees? His queen, T, wasn't just a supporting player in gold eyeliner. She had letters with foreign kings. She appears on scarabs commemorating ridiculous things like a lake he built for her to sail on. She had her name in cartouches reserved for royalty, not just anyone with good cheekbones. In art, she takes goddess cues, dignity with edges, Hathor's elegance, Isis's authority. A royal household that functioned because a woman with actual competence set the tone. Imagine her at a palace door expression like, "Did you bring me the treaty, or just more excuses?" She's the human version of Hathor's calm gaze. No wonder foreign courts wrote back politely. Of course, right after all that stability, Egypt decided to experiment. Enter Amarna. Akhenaten and Nefertiti, the Aten-only project, big sun disk energy. The Aten's rays end in tiny hands offering ankas to the royal noses. It's intimate and oddly cute. It's also a dramatic reconfiguration of the divine roster. Hathor and Isis didn't get fired so much as reassigned off stage. Officially, the Aten hovered above. Unofficially, households kept their small gods close. Nefertiti's profile, long neck, tidy jaw, feels like Hathor's poise in a different costume. You can change the playlist, you keep the rhythm. The regime built a city, then it evaporated in royal years the way sand erases footprints. When the dust settled, old temples got their budgets back. The Aten set, politely. Cue Tutankhamun, the boy with the gold mask and a surprisingly intact PR team since 1922. His restoration stela brags about reopening sanctuaries the previous era had neglected. Isis and Hathor slid right back into public roles like, "Thank you for remembering the group chat." Tut's short life, illnesses, injuries, probably a lot of being told what to do by older men, was propped up by goddess imagery that promised continuity. And then came Ankhesenamun's problem. Tut died, no heir. Court sharks circled. The queen likely wrote to the Hittite king Suppiluliuma with that famous letter historians call the Dakamunsu letter. She asked him to send a son for her to marry. Bold? Revolutionary? Entirely in the Isis playbook. When you can't solve the puzzle inside the system, reassemble the pieces from somewhere unexpected. The Hittite prince died on the way. Egyptians called it politics. Isis called it sigh.
Let's drift to Tusret, a woman we don't talk about enough. 19th, 20th dynasty edge, regent for the young Sipta, later ruling in her own name. Her tomb in the Valley of the Kings, KV-14, is big, reused, palimpsest heavy because nothing about late Ramesside transitions was tidy.
Tusret appears on tomb walls face to face with deities like she belongs there, because she did. She's not a soap opera queen. She's a manager trying to keep the lights on in a power grid flickering with succession strain. In ritual scenes, Hathor and Isis receive her with the standard package: embraces, hand-holding, guided tours of the afterlife's paperwork. Later, Setnacht started a new dynasty and wrote over her. That's one way to end a meeting. The goddess faces on those walls still look unbothered. They've seen worse. Speaking of queen lists, roll back to the 12th dynasty and meet Sobek Neferu, the beauty of Sobek. Cocooned in a name that wears a crocodile like a cape, she ruled at the end of the Middle Kingdom. Her monuments are sparse, but the official titles are clear. She took kingly names, wore kingly regalia, and kept the realm going across a dynastic handoff. She isn't officially stamped Isis or Hathor, but queen as goddess is the language she speaks: nourishment of kingship, stabilization of succession, ritual competence. Her brief reign lives in the cracks in the continuity, not flashy, effective. She would have done well at a spreadsheet, too. Let's leave throne rooms before the air gets stale and head downriver to Dendera again, because Hathor's temple is a masterclass in soft power with stone margins. The main temple you walk through today is late Ptolemaic and Roman, which is a fun fact because it means Cleopatra VII and her son Caesarion are literally carved on the walls doing things like presenting offerings to Hathor. Cleopatra appears with that Ptolemaic double bun and diadem, wearing Hathor's horned crown like it was made for her. Caesarion, as a miniature king, stands obediently by. The message is unsubtle and delightful. Cleopatra is an Isis Hathor queen in a world that needed to see those roles very publicly. If you're ruling a mixed Greek-Egyptian city-state empire in the age of Roman attention, you pick the goddess costume that calms the majority. She did. The Dendera ceiling with the zodiac, yes, the famous circular one in the Louvre now, glowed above spaces perfumed with incense. The building program stretched across rulers like a relay. Ptolemies and Roman emperors finished facades that had started in earlier plans. The place held scribal rooms, crypts with tightly packed reliefs, roof chapels for star rituals. Hathor's face on the columns is square-jawed and eternally understanding. If a goddess could recommend a face oil, she would. We promise some elite weirdness, and the Ptolemies are happy to deliver. Cleopatra VII gets the headlines, but her ancestors were a fever dream in Greek. Ptolemy VIII, nicknamed Physcon, which is the ancient world's equivalent of Chunky, married his sister Cleopatra II and then her daughter Cleopatra III at the same time. Yes, at the same time, because why not triple down on awkward? He had a reputation for cruelty that even his coin portraits can't soften. Cleopatra II rebelled at one point, minting coins in her own name. Family dinners must have been an experience. Through all this, the family leaned hard into goddess branding: Isis for legitimacy, Hathor for joy that we swear still exists, titles like Philomator or mother-loving, and Sotira or savior stuck to queen names like protective amulets. It was the ancient version of reputation management, except with sistrums and gold crowns. Now cross to the wider Mediterranean, because Isis didn't retire at the first passport check. Her cult spread because sailors talk, merchants migrate, and a goddess who hears prayers doesn't care about borders. In Pompeii, the Temple of Isis sat near the theaters. It was small, brightly painted, and very busy, until the day the volcano decided everyone needed an ash blanket. Frescoes inside show ritual scenes, linen-clad priests carrying the sacred bark, women shaking sistra, offerings to the goddess who kept storms polite. After the earthquake of 62 CE wrecked parts of Pompeii, the Temple of Isis was one of the first rebuilt. That tells you how devotees felt about her. If rebuilding a goddess's house comes before your own, you're committed.
Rome itself had the Iseum Campense in the Campus Martius area. Obelisks went up, Egyptian granite mixed with Roman swagger. Emperors rebuilt the complex after fires. The Flavians did, Domitian included, because a popular goddess is good politics. Cult officials wore linen, shaved their heads, carried the situla, little bronze buckets shaped like the Nile's rebirth, and shook the sistrum to keep the cosmic rhythm on beat. In March, the Navigium Isidis festival launched a decorated ship to bless the sailing season. The city gathered for the pageant. Imagine Rome doing anything quietly. They did this loudly, colorfully, but even then, Isis's vibe was care and safety. Keep the sea kind. Keep commerce moving. Keep homes intact. If you want the Roman-era voice of the goddess, you go to the Eratologies, self-proclamations carved on stone. The one from Kime is famous. Isis says things like, "I am she who separated earth from heaven. I established laws. I made the sea navigable. I invented marriage. I am the mistress of rivers and winds and whatever humans love." It's a brand identity list that borders on the exhaustive. She's the kind of goddess who will take credit for your morning coffee if you let her, and honestly, fair. Apuleius, a North African writer of the 2nd century CE, gives us the literary version in The Golden Ass. The hapless hero, turned into a donkey by bad magic and worse choices, prays to the moon on the beach, and Isis shows up in a dream wearing an everything outfit, crowned with a boat, a lunar disc, wheat ears, snakes, flowers. She brought her whole closet. She speaks in universal terms and promises rescue if he joins her mysteries. The man eats roses, becomes human again, and joins a cult with linen and sistrums and a lot of baths. You would think being a donkey would ruin your week. Instead, it becomes the world's most elaborate recruitment campaign. The vibe is gentle salvation, not thunderbolts. Isis fixes things and then asks for steady devotion. Low drama, high maintenance, in the best way. Back in Egypt, domestic life kept its own pace. In Deir el-Medina, the artisan village that built royal tombs, the paperwork survived like it had a personal grudge against oblivion. Ostraca, limestone flakes with ink, tell you who borrowed grain, who owed beer, who got in trouble for partying on shift. Paneb, a foreman, was accused by his co-worker of theft, assault, inappropriate behavior, and a general lack of chill. The dossier reads like an ancient HR file with curses. In the gaps you can see households turning to oracles when decisions felt slippery. People asked Amun. They asked Merit Sejer, the cobra goddess of the mountain. They asked Hathor in her local form. They presented written questions and watched the gods bark, tilt. Yes meant yes, no meant no. It's democracy, but you let the god count the votes. Women at Deir el-Medina owned property, divorced, remarried, and ran households with a competence that would make TA nod approvingly. You find small statues, amulets, and household shrines where Isis and Hathor live side by side with Bes and Taweret, the dwarf and the hippo who specialize in childbirth and domestic protection. People kept the big theology at temple. They kept the small tenderness at home. Sistrums weren't just for festivals. You could have a cheap one in wood or pottery to shake gently when the baby cried, or when your own nerves needed a lullaby. Everybody likes a good sound bath. Love magic existed, of course it did. Some papyri, Greek and Demotic, preserve spells that invoke Isis or other powers to attract a lover, bind a rival, or cool down a situation. They're morally messy, like all magic that tries to drag someone else's free will onto your porch. A classic form: make a figurine, recite the names of deities, burn aromatics, and ask the goddess to bring so-and-so to me, with language that suggests the ancient equivalent of texting at 2:13 a.m. Isis shows up a lot because she gets results. Hathor shows up because she knows the language of desire. Sometimes the spells are sweet. Sometimes they are absolutely not. The gods are patient. The scribes are busy. Human hearts are the same in any century.
Let's return to Sinai and the turquoise mines, because that place is basically Hathor's LinkedIn. Serebid el-Kadim is a plateau with a temple to Hathor, the Lady of Turquoise, built and rebuilt across Middle Kingdom and New Kingdom reigns. Expedition leaders carved their gratitude in stone stelae. I came with 200 men. I returned with all. I brought turquoise. May Hathor smile at me. The earliest alphabetic inscriptions, the Proto-Sinaitic ones, show up here too,
scratched by workers who adapted hieroglyphic forms into a simpler system that would someday create almost everything you read. That happened under Hathor's eyes. Serene and busy, she's always present in any story about people doing hard work in hard places and asking for tenderness to even it out. Remember the beautiful reunion we mentioned before? The annual trip where Hathor's statue traveled from Dendera to Edfu to meet Horus? That soft power is calendar management. Myth said the Eye of Ra wandered, got angry, and had to be brought home with music and beer. Festivals said the goddess travels, the city parties, and the river and crops remember their schedule. Processions carried the bark past cheering crowds. Priests sang. Musicians shook sistra and menat necklaces. Did everyone behave? Officially, yes. Realistically, mostly. The point wasn't to lose control. It was to practice joy as a civic duty. Egyptians understood that contentment takes rehearsal. It isn't an accident. Hathor ran the rehearsal schedule. If you like small practicalities, the goddess toolkit is worth a calm inventory. For Isis, the tie-it knot, like a droopy-armed ankh, used as a protective amulet in life and death. The throne hieroglyph, crown. The kite bird form, because her morning cry was said to sound like a kite's call, and birds are faster than horses when you need to get somewhere emotionally. For Hathor, horns and sun disk, cow ears, sistrum, menat. For both, mirrors. Bronze mirrors with Hathor heads on the handles were common gifts. Polished metal that shows you yourself. Very goddess-coded. The idea that beauty and truth are reflective, not aggressive, dovetails nicely with a culture that liked its eyeliner precise and its cosmology concise. We could pretend the Greeks and Romans absorbed all this without editorializing. They did not. They translated and reshaped. Isis got mixed with Demeter and Aphrodite in some places. Hathor's role morphed into aspects of Aphrodite, and also into the softer sides of Cybele and other mother figures. The point isn't to police borders, it's to notice how a goddess survives by wearing the right hat in the right city. In Marseille or Delos, an Isis temple feels familiar because the sea still needs an adult. In Rome, the shaved-headed priests in linen costumes looked foreign enough to make some senators twitchy. Bans happened, then unbans. The cult always snapped back because sailors kept returning alive and told their friends who to thank. Cleopatra VII deserves another slow pass because the lazy stereotype says seduction equals perfume and a smirt. She was a polyglot, a project manager, a queen who sat in the library's shadow and understood intellectual charm. She used Isis imagery not to bat eyelashes, but to knit together a diverse kingdom with a familiar story. Mother of a divine child, protector of the land, dispenser of plenty. At Dendera, she and Caesarion present offerings as the last Egyptian ruler with the older gods officially on payroll. It's moving in a way that doesn't require dramatics. The carving is shallowly cut. The style is late. The symbolism is still clear. A queen standing in a stream of tradition that could carry freight, and did, until Rome rerouted the river.
When Rome won, they repackaged Cleopatra as a cautionary tale. Dangerous Eastern queen, seductress, flutes and snakes and all that nonsense. It played well to a Senate that wanted to feel moral. But Isis continued under Roman roofs, quietly, then very not quietly. By the 2nd century, the Navigium Isidis parade was calendar official. Apuleius's prose glowed. Eratologies multiplied. And in many houses, mirrors with Hathor heads still sat on vanities because everyday life changes slower than Julian law. Now, because we like mortals with messy paperwork, let's peek at Ty and Nefertiti again with a softer lens. Ty, as Amenhotep III's queen, had that lake built because the royal barge needed a place to reflect the sky. The commemorative scarab inscriptions brag about it. They also brag about a lion hunt and the marriage of a daughter to a Mutani prince. It's curated content. Nefertiti, in the Amarna years, is shown in scenes that verge on tenderness, kissing her daughters, sitting with the king under the Aten's hands. The domestic vibe is unusual for Egyptian reliefs, less stiff, more breathing. People sometimes try to fit her into a villain or victim slot.
She reads better as a woman with power, who tried a cosmic experiment and lived long enough to see the old gods return. Her family story didn't end softly. Most don't. The goddesses will have understood. And then there's Nefertari again, because she earns second helpings. Inside QV66, her tomb glows with blues and reds, so saturated you'd think the paint just dried. Hathor greets her with an arm around the shoulder. Isis offers an ankh like a piece of candy you're supposed to accept. Nefertari plays Sinet with an invisible opponent. The captions are elegantly carved. The queen's face is symmetrical enough to unsettle you. People visit and go quiet without being told. It's hard to keep snark going when the room is arranged so beautifully. Hathor would approve. We haven't touched the sycamore yet, and she will stand up for herself if ignored. Hathor, as Lady of the Sycamore, shows up in Theban tomb paintings giving the dead water from a tree's heart. A hand extends from the trunk with a cup. The idea is so soothing it should be a screensaver. Egypt made afterlife anxiety a bureaucratic issue you could handle with forms and a good lawyer. And then it tucked in moments like this. Trees that mother you. Hathor adding shade to eternity. The dead apparently liked picnics. We should say the word Sekhmet again just to balance the sweetness. Hathor and Sekhmet are two faces of the Eye of Ra. One calms with wine and music, the other protects with teeth and a very direct pounce. Amenhotep III commissioned hundreds of Sekhmet statues, possibly as a way to pacify plague or align daily offerings with divine temper. It's the same spectrum. Passion cooled into compassion. Egyptians were ahead of us on mood regulation. They ritualized it. We caffeinate and hope for the best. If you're collecting names of small objects because that's how your brain relaxes, here's a basket. Tayet, knot of Isis, protective, often red, worn on the body, sewn into mummy bandages. Djed, pillar of stability, Osiris's backbone, not purely feminine, but Isis uses it like a pro. Sistrum, rattle, naos shaped or looped, devoted to Hathor and Isis, shaken with intention. Manat, necklace counterweight and percussion instrument, flipped and swung in rhythm. Also a pretty word. Situla, bucket-shaped ritual vessel, often carried by Isis priestesses. That's the water of life, not your average mop pail.
One last sail by Philae because stories like a soft refrain. The island complex kept Isis's cult alive long after the rest of Egypt had moved on to new empires and new bureaucracies. Nubian kings patronized it. Priests wrote in Demotic and Greek. Pilgrims came from far away with offerings wrapped in anxieties and hope. When the closure came under Justinian in the 6th century, the final priests left with statues, possibly to Nubia, where forms of the old cult lingered. Even then, villagers around Aswan told stories that implied the goddess refused to be completely evicted. She didn't shout. She refused politely. Meanwhile, in private homes across the Mediterranean, Isis lingered as a household name. Women whispered to her in labor. Sailors made vows when waves got personal. Merchants promised thanks if cargo arrived dry. The goddess's job description scaled beautifully. Seduction here was not scandal. It was soft gravity. Draw the boat to harbor. Draw the breath back into the lungs. Draw the family back to the table. By now you can probably feel the pattern that Egyptians loved. Alignment. Isis aligns broken pieces until they behave like a whole. Hathor aligns mood with order until the day goes smoothly. Queens align mortal rule with divine permission until a dynasty looks legitimate. The cults weren't sideshows. They were the connective tissue of a civilization that was very aware of how easily things fall apart without gentle pressure applied in the right places. We'll end this stretch where we began, with music you can almost not hear. A priestess in white linen, hair smelling of lotus oil, lifting a sistrum in Dendera's courtyard. The metal rings whisper a rhythm you know even if you've never heard it. A man in a different century, in a different harbor, lifts a small bronze Isis and makes a promise about a safe return.
A queen places her hand in the carved hand of a goddess on a wall that has seen more sunrises than any calendar deserves. Nothing explodes. No one runs. The gods liked an orderly procession. We'll keep floating. Next, we can drift into the late afterlives, how these goddesses were translated, renamed, argued over, and quietly kept alive by people who preferred devotion to debate. But not now. For now, the lamps burn low, the columns lean into twilight, and even the river is being very polite. Close your eyes. Hathor will take the next watch. Isis is already awake.
Okay, back to low light and comfortable pillows. If the room smells faintly of imaginary lotus oil, that's just your brain doing what ancient temples trained it to do. We're gliding into the afterlives, not the literal fields of reeds, but the long lives these goddesses had outside their home turf. It won't be dramatic, it will be steady. We'll trace how Isis and Hathor moved through dynasties and empires, survived rebrands, soothed royal fiascos, and stayed employed long after the final temple doors sighed shut. This is soft power on a very long timeline. We pace it like a procession. We keep our voices library-level calm. Let's start with a royal scandal that reads like a slow-burn disaster memo. Late New Kingdom, Ramesses III on the throne. The man liked his name big, and his reliefs bigger. He also liked to be alive. A faction in his harem apparently disagreed. The harem conspiracy, as it's politely called, surfaced in the judicial papyrus of Turin, basically a courtroom transcript with all the drama neatly copied in ink. A secondary queen, probably named T, no relation to the earlier formidable Queen T, wanted her son Pantower to replace the designated heir. The plan involved letters, courtiers, gatekeepers, and helpful spells. Yes, spells. The conspirators used wax figurines and written charms, classic tools from the portable end of temple magic. This is where seduction and influence slide into please make the guards fall asleep territory. Egyptians believed words moved reality. The good priests used that for healing and harvests. The less good used it to help a palace coup. The trials ended with forced deaths for some, impaled consequences for others. Prince Pantower was allowed to take his own life. Quietly, in a back room. No gore on the page, just formal phrasing and finality. What does that have to do with Isis and Hathor? Two things. First, the tools of calm alignment, the rites, the names, the little figurines, were so effective that even people making bad choices reached for them. Second, the royal system responded with more ritual. To patch the cosmic crack, priests did more offerings, more shaking of sistra, more performances of orderly joy. The state used sweetness to fix salt. If a court couldn't keep trust, it could at least keep festivals. That sounds cynical, it's actually consistent. In Egypt, celebration was infrastructure. Now a gentler kind of power, the god's wife of Amun. It's Amun's office, yes, but the job description pulls lines from the goddess playbook. Starting earlier, but really blooming in the Third Intermediate Period and Late Period, this position put royal women in charge of huge estates, temple rituals, and Theban politics. Adoption sealed succession. A reigning god's wife would adopt a princess as heir, and the whole thing read like a divine stepmother contract with good benefits. Under the Kushite kings of the 25th dynasty, the role became a masterpiece of soft control. Daharkasista, Ameniridas I took the post. Later, Shepenwepet II, a daughter of P, held it. These Nubian women in white linen and towering plumes walked Thebes as if the place had been designed to match their stride. On stelae, they raised Sistra like Hathor's daughters, and their inscriptions sound like Isis scrolling through her titles. They didn't swing swords, they swung ritual. The city obeyed anyway. The adoption stela of Shepenwepet II includes the sort of tidy legal phrases that would make a modern lawyer purr. The transfer of authority is presented as serene, God-willed, and entirely unexciting. Which is kind of the point.
If you do your goddess work right, the handover looks boring. No riots, no Dear Citizens letters. Just a woman with a sistrum, a seal, and a schedule.
Slide north to the delta for a minute. Sais becomes fashionable in the 26th dynasty. Neith is the headline goddess there, an ancient grandmother of war and weaving who kept her looms organized and her archery on point. But Isis and Hathor don't go on vacation. The delta is full of local cults braided together like river channels. Naucratis, the Greek trading post granted by the pharaoh Amasis, buzzed with sanctuaries, including one for the Egyptian triad and various Greek deities. Amasis himself, the charming commoner turned king with a flair for PR, dedicated to Greek temples and told a famous story about turning a footbath into a statue to teach elites how respect works. The whole thing smells like someone who understood marketing. If you want stable trade, give the Greeks their gods. If you want stable Egypt, keep your own, and let Isis and Hathor handle the hospitality desk. Isis shrugs and gets on more ships. Hathor smiles and expands her guest list. Ptolemaic time again, because the dynastic weirdness keeps on giving. The family tree looked like a pretzel someone sat on. Cleopatra II, Cleopatra III, Ptolemy VI, Ptolemy VIII. Nicely named, poorly behaved. Ptolemy VIII, Physcon, Potbelly, managed to marry his sister Cleopatra II and later her daughter Cleopatra III because apparently awkwardness had not yet peaked. When Cleopatra II rebelled against him, he responded by sending her an unmissable message involving their son. We won't rehearse it, the details are violent and tasteless. Let's just say it was a rupture no festival could fully heal. The queens leaned into goddess imagery to steady the ship as much as they could. Isis, as mother and protector, gave Cleopatra II a public language for grief and claim. Hathor's joy gave Cleopatra III a stage for civic calm. Coinage shows queens with attributes of Isis. Inscriptions pile on divine epithets, Philometor, Philometor, Eergetus, as if kindness in Greek could sand off a family disaster. It didn't fix the people, it buffered the public. Meanwhile, far from Alexandria's family drama, Philae kept Isis going like a quiet, efficient heart. The temple complex served Egyptians and Nubians. The goddess made no fuss about paperwork. The last hieroglyphic inscription carved anywhere in Egypt, 394 CE, sits on a wall at Philae, a little epigraphic nightlight. The last Demotic text, 452 CE, appears there too. Even after imperial decrees tried to dim the sanctuary, local treaties allowed Nubian groups to visit and make offerings. When closure finally came in the 6th century, it was by imperial order, not by popular request. The goddess likely left the island by boat, the way she had always traveled, escorted by priests who had been doing the route for generations. We aren't told if they looked back. We are free to imagine that they did. Let's pause and note how very portable Isis became. In the Hellenistic world and then under Rome, she expanded like a well-managed brand. In port towns, you find Icia, the plural of Iseum, temples to Isis with Egyptian decor accents tucked into urban grids that had never seen a hippo. The Navigium Isis in Rome launched the sailing season each spring. A model ship decorated like a festival cupcake was paraded through busy streets and taken down to the water. Priests in linen shook sistra and carried the situla, those bronze buckets with a curved handle that looked like they were designed for very fancy watering of sacred plants. People came to watch because spectacle is a universal language, and the sea is a universal anxiety. Aristocratic women in Rome found the cult appealing. It offered ritual roles that didn't require an emperor's permission. Statues of priestesses of Isis survive, carved with the narrow, pleated linen dresses, the knot at the chest, the sistrum in one hand and the situla in the other. Inscriptions give names and titles.
You get the sense of a parallel society, respectable, pious, perhaps a bit exotic to conservative senators, moving quietly under the marble balconies. The cult was accused, as new things often are, of being too attractive, which, considering Isis's job description, was probably accurate and absolutely the point.
If you like literature with your incense, Apuleius' Isis scene keeps earning its re-raids. The goddess appears to a very startled donkey human and introduces herself with a list of roles that goes on like a conference keynote slide. By whatever name, she says, which is a graceful way of telling a Mediterranean stew of cultures that it's okay to call her different things in different cities. She'll still show up. I am nature, the universal mother, she says. And no, we're not doing the whole speech. The important part is that the rescue is personal, the vow is public, and the initiation involves clean clothes, a haircut, and very early mornings. Cult life was hygiene forward. Now, an empress with salon energy, Julia Domna, Syrian-born, married to Septimius Severus, mother to Caracalla and Geta, curator of philosophers who loved an audience. The Severan period in Rome traded in Eastern-flavored cults and cosmopolitan theology. Isis thrived in that world. So did Serapis, the male companion deity, whose beard and basket haircut look like a serious librarian who also does miracles. Julia presided over a court that liked conversations about soul and fate and the right diet for wisdom. She also endured the kind of family drama that makes Ptolemaic charts look restrained. Caracalla killed Geta. That's not gentle. We will not dwell. Julia held the empire together with correspondence in poise until politics and grief did their careful, relentless work. Heads of empresses sometimes wore Isis-inspired hairstyles in portraits, knots and waves that echoed the goddess's fashion. Coins carried reverses of Isis nursing Horus, the lactons motif that feels so domestic people still whisper in museums when they stand in front of it. The message shifts slightly in Roman contexts: fertility of the imperial family, safety of the state, good times ahead. The content is familiar, the frames and captions change. Back to Egypt. Alexandria, ancient city of libraries, lighthouses, and people who never stopped arguing, gave Isis a cosmopolitan home. Serapis's Serapeum, a great temple on a hill, held art, philosophy, and a very opinionated cat population, if we're extrapolating. Late antiquity brought religious changes. Processions began to feature different names, different hymns. Icons of Mary nursing Jesus, the Maria Lactons, appear later in the Mediterranean world with a visual echo of Isis Lactons. Historians noticed the overlap: a seated mother, a child at the breast, the gesture of protection and supply. It isn't a one-to-one transfer, it's a cultural muscle memory. People keep the posture that comforts them. We'll whisper a name here carefully: Hypatia. A late antique philosopher and mathematician in Alexandria, trained in Neoplatonism, teacher to officials who needed someone sensible to explain reality. She died at the hands of a crowd in 415 CE as political tensions, religious identities, and very human failures collided. It's not a soft story, and we won't make it one. But if you listen for Isis, you can hear the goddess's afterlife in Hypatia's dignity, in the insistence that knowledge and order matter. In another timeline, she would have shaken a sistrum before lecturing. In this one, she's a marker of a city's mood breaking. Not all processions end at the right door. Let's ease back into Thebes, where the god's wife kept working. In the early 6th century BCE, a Libyan princess, Shepenwepet I, set the template. Later, under the Kushites, Amenaertes I and Shepenwepet II expanded the office. Then in the Sate period, Nitocris, adopted by Shepenwepet II, arrived in Thebes with an entourage and gifts that read like a diplomatic thank you for the keys. The adoption stela of Nitocris spells it out: a journey, a ceremony, a handover. You can imagine the polite logistics emails if they had had them. The symbolism is exactly Isis tier: adopt, protect,
formalized sustain. No coups, no accidents, just a woman receiving a title that says, kindly, you are now the goddess's hands.
You can step into their chapel at Medinet Habu, see the reliefs of processions, offerings, and tidy hieroglyphs that fold the women into a very old sentence, order continues. Their images are not dramatic, they are remarkably normal. Normal is a victory. Meanwhile, Dendera's temple complex spans Ptolemaic and Roman work like a quilt. Wall scenes show Cleopatra VII with Caesarion making offerings. Reliefs retain the old Egyptian style so relentlessly it feels like a point. In a world where everything else is changing, languages, rulers, coin shapes, the goddess temple keeps its grammar. Hathor's faces on the columns are as square and miraculously patient in the 1st century BCE as they were 1,000 years prior. You can read that as conservatism. You can also read it as a deliberate choice to preserve the atmosphere that keeps people cooperative. No one sleeps better because a frieze is trendy. They sleep better because the ceiling stars are in the right places. Pompeii's Temple of Isis deserves another quiet walk. After the earthquake of 62 CE wrecked parts of the city, this small sanctuary was rebuilt quickly. The frescoes show priests with shaved heads, women shaking sistra, and Jupiter Serapis peeking in from a side niche like a supportive neighbor. The spaces are domestic in scale. It feels like somewhere you'd stop after a market and before a nap. When Vesuvius buried everything, it also preserved the fact that this temple mattered to people enough to fix it first. The plaque explicitly credits a benefactor's teen son for dedicating it. Isis had good youth outreach. If you've ever wondered what a day in a Roman Isis cult looked like, imagine early mornings, ritual bathing, linen that made everyone look like they had ironed their lives, offerings of milk, flowers, bread, hymns that sound like the Nile in Latin, initiations that required practice, not theatrical heroism. The goddess promised help, safer voyages, healthier bodies, better odds in a rough city, and asked for steadiness. Devotion was a schedule. Slide back to Egypt's longer arc. After Philae, Isis doesn't disappear. She moves into memory and habit, into art and proverbs, into the posture of mothers and queens. In Coptic Egypt, Mary receives titles and love that echo older hymns. Theotokos, God-bearer, a kind of cosmic mother whose presence calms households. In Nubia, temples become churches. Some architectural bones stay visible under new frescoes. It's not plagiarism, it's ecology. Buildings are practical creatures. They keep their good tricks.
If you want a late cameo, medieval and Renaissance Europe loved an Egypt that was half real and half fantasy. Isis shows up in allegories as nature, with a veil that philosophers keep trying to pull back. Sometimes she holds a sistrum. Sometimes she has a throne on her head because artists are magpies. The idea survives. There is a feminine principle that covers, reveals, nourishes, and persuades reality to be kind. It's a thought that travels well. Back to the royals, briefly, because tragedy and tenderness tend to share antechambers. Tutankhamun's CT scans tell a mild story of a young king with a club foot, malaria, and a face that looked more human than the mask admits. Inbreeding didn't help. The family lines had looped a few too many times. He died young. People sent him to the West with an arsenal of ritual gear, amulets, spells, the full Book of the Dead starter pack. Among the jewelry, the Tiyet knots of Isis in red stone, placed like little "We've got you" notes along the wrappings. The boy king is overrated as an emperor and underrated as a person who was very loved by people who were powerless to fix him. Isis was there to handle the part humans could not. Ramesses II's firstborn son died before him. The mourning rituals would have been intense, methodical, and drenched in goddess language. The pharaoh portrayed himself as eternal. The man had to sit with loss. Hathor's job in those rooms was to make the inhale possible. The goddess of joy handles grief too. She knows it intimately. That's why she's good at her other job. We can afford a small inventory of survival tricks because you'll see them in lots of cultures once you start looking. Number 1, keep the music. Instruments and patterns outlive theology. A rattle can change gods and keep its function. 2, keep the posture. Mother and child, embrace and ankh, a hand to a forehead. People repeat shapes that calm them. 3, keep the festivals. Rename them if you must. The boat still needs blessings in spring. 4, keep the titles that do work. She who hears prayers, Lady of the West, Mistress of Life. Function sticks better than myth. And finally, a last glide past a column where Hathor's face catches the last light. The square jaw is practical, the smile is a secret. Joy, if tended, is governance. Isis, somewhere nearby, adjusts a knot on a statue's chest and checks her list. People think seduction means glamour and candlelight. In Egypt, it meant the attractive force of order. It meant making the right thing easier than the wrong thing. It meant keeping a city from fighting with itself because the calendar remembered when to sing. The priestess shakes the sistrum once. The metal rings barely move. It's enough. The room softens. The air settles. Outside, the river does what it always does. It proceeds. Inside, the stories do what they have learned to do. They attempt quietly and keep breathing.
Back again, lights low, pillows cooperating. If your tea is lukewarm, that's correct for our pace. We're drifting into the long echo of Isis and Hathor after Egypt stopped being in charge of Egypt. Bans, rebrands, small scandals handled with large sighs. We'll keep the volume set to library whisper. The gods prefer an indoor voice. Let's begin in Rome, where Isis had a complicated relationship with municipal regulations. The city kept changing its mind. Early on, the Senate didn't want Egyptian cults inside the sacred boundary, the pomerium. The logic was half religious hygiene, half we already have enough gods, thank you. So altars to Isis and Serapis stood outside the official city heart. Augustus was tidy. He kept them out of the core. Tiberius went further in 19 CE after a scandal we'll get to, which is exactly the kind of soft, sad human mess these goddesses had to keep cleaning up. Caligula later brought the cult back into style, because of course he did. Domitian rebuilt the big Iseum Campense after a fire. The Flavians liked a good reconstruction photo op. The Iseum Campense stood near the Campus Martius, with courtyards, halls, and obelisks that had traveled more than most senators. One of those obelisks now perches on Bernini's elephant outside Santa Maria sopra Minerva, looking very pleased with itself. Another stands by the Pantheon at Piazza della Rotonda, pretending it has always lived there. Obelisks are professional at this. Move them, and they act like it was their idea. About that scandal under Tiberius, the story comes from Josephus. A noblewoman named Paulina, very respectable, very devout, worshipped Isis. A man named Decius Mundus wanted her. She said no. He bribed some temple staff to stage a visit from Anubis, in reality an ordinary priest playing dress-up, to tell her the god desired a night with her. She agreed, thinking she was fulfilling a vow to a deity, not a person. When the truth came out, Tiberius shut down the temple, punished the priests, and tossed the cult out of Rome for a while. It's a bleak little tale about trust and costume jewelry. It's also a reminder that sacred spaces only stay safe when the people inside them deserve the job. Isis didn't plan that week. She had cleanup duty again. Caligula reversed the ban. As emperors do, he undid then redid a lot of things. By the time Domitian got around to rebuilding after the Great Fire of 80 CE, Rome's Iseum was back with enthusiasm. Egyptian granite, Greek columns, Latin inscriptions, and a calendar that included the Novigium Isidis, the spring festival that launched a decorated model ship to bless the sailing season. If you stand near the Tiber in your mind
And imagine a shiny little boat covered in flowers, carried through crowds while priests in crisp linen shake sistra. You've basically time traveled. There were processions, music, and vows. People asked for safe voyages, good wind, and possibly discounts on freight if the goddess was feeling generous. Roman women liked Isis for sensible reasons. She heard prayers. She didn't ask your rank to prove your worth. Her rites included bathing, clean linen, and sunrise hymns. It was piety with good hygiene and predictable benefits. Inscriptions show priestesses. Yes, women held office. Their names carved with their tools, a sistrum in one hand, a setula in the other. Freed women and freed men show up a lot in these dedications. The cult offered belonging to people the old system liked to sideline. That alone explains its popularity better than any satirist's eye roll.
Speaking of satirists, Juvenal made fun of Isis devotees and their rituals, because that's what satirists do. He grumbled about women running to Isis for every little thing and priests playing exotic. He also complained about pretty much everything, so we don't need to take it personally. If Juvenal had a modern blog, he would have been ratioed and then secretly read by everyone. Let's float back to Egypt and handle a small but powerful object. The Sippus of Horus. It's a carved relief of the child Horus standing on crocodiles, clutching snakes and scorpions like they are props, with protective texts around him. You poured water over the Sippus, collected it, and drank or sprinkled it on yourself to cure bites and stings. The healing came through words and contact. The underlying myth is sweet and a little stern. Isis protects children, everyone's children, by naming, calming, and directing the dangerous creatures. She doesn't declare war on scorpions. She asks them to behave. It's very Egyptian to prefer negotiation with nature over conquest. There's another gentle fable that lived in house shrines, the story of Isis and the 7 scorpions. Traveling incognito, Isis sought shelter one night. A rich woman refused. The goddess slept elsewhere. The 7 scorpions of her retinue, annoyed on her behalf, stung the refusing woman's child. Isis, more mother than judge, healed the child anyway and sent a lesson downriver about hospitality. The moral isn't vengeance, it's compassion's priority. The goddess will fix the pain first. The lecture comes later, softly. Hathor, not to be outdone in tender practicality, appears as the lady of the sycamore to offer water and shade to the dead. In Theban tomb paintings, a hand comes out of a tree trunk with a cup. And honestly, it's the most comforting image in the afterlife portfolio. This is the kind of hospitality that becomes policy. Give people shade, give them a drink, and they'll stop being quite so difficult about death. We can unroll a few love poems for Hathor too, because soft power includes poetry you whisper into sleeves. New Kingdom love songs invoke her as matchmaker and mood curator. My heart longs to go down to the water beside you, a line might go, with references to lotus blossoms, sistrums, and the clever suggestion that the goddess is to blame for all this yearning. Hathor gets credit for introducing people who were perfectly fine, and then suddenly not fine at all. The songs feel modern because love has not changed. People wrote as if the goddess arranged eye contact like a public service. Let's move north again to Alexandria, a city that never stopped speaking in multiple languages at once. The Serapeum, the great temple of Serapis, sat on a hill. The library stood nearby. Isis lived easily in this world within a world. Roman emperors visited, Greek philosophers debated, Egyptian priests kept things on schedule because someone had to. Serapis, an Egyptian-Greek hybrid deity with a beard and a basket hairdo, shared space with Isis as a divine couple in some places. The theology was blended, the offerings were familiar: incense, milk, bread, flowers, promises. Cities liked gods who kept ships safe and stomachs calmer. They delivered.
If you want a civilized piece of gossip from late antiquity, there's the famous line about a veil. Plutarch says a temple at Sais bore an inscription, "I am all that has been, is, and will be. No mortal has lifted my veil." He associated it with Isis. The temple belonged to Neith. the ancient goddess with impeccable taste in archery and weaving. But the point stands. The feminine divine was the mystery underneath. People still quote this like it's a life motto. It probably is. The goddesses weren't offended by attribution errors. They were busy. We can touch the Ra secret name story very gently because it's a pastoral scene disguised as a power play. In one version, Ra grows old and drools. Isis shapes a serpent from his spittle and earth, very on brand for someone who can make a crown from a nut. The serpent bites the sun god. He can't cure himself. Isis says she'll heal him if he shares his true name. Names are power in Egypt. He agrees. She heals him. The world continues. No thunderbolt, no yelling, just a goddess negotiating with reality using rules reality already wrote. It's not about tricking an old man. It's about consent and knowledge properly exchanged. Ra didn't retire. He adjusted his password management. All right, back to Rome for a little more social history, because Isis thrived in apartment buildings and tenement courtyards as much as in marble precincts. Delos, that busy island of bankers and slaves, had multiple sanctuaries to foreign gods, including Isis. Freed men built them, freed women lit lamps there. These were communities that relied on gods and mutual aid in equal measure. Not everyone had a senator to write letters for them. A goddess who listened helped balance the world. Initiations taught daily habits as much as cosmic truths. Wake early, wash, keep your word, help fellow initiates, don't get dramatic. Hathor does not mind being asked to reschedule fate, but she appreciates snacks.
We can visit Bebed el-Hagar briefly, a ruined granite temple in the delta dedicated to Isis. Imagine a gigantic puzzle made of dark blocks scattered across a field. The Ptolemies built it. Time and quarrying took it down. Granite was power and piggy bank. Local builders liked to borrow. Still, the relief fragments show you the queenly goddess operating in that same familiar way, receiving milk offerings from kings, holding a sistrum, wearing horns and disc, offering ankh signs like party favors. If you find a tayet knot in that field, you keep it. Then you put it in a drawer and worry you should take it to a museum. That's how modern piety works. Pompeii again. Because the little temple of Isis there gives us a perfect domestic-scale picture of cult life. It was rebuilt after the earthquake of 62 CE with private funds. A teenager's name appears on the dedication plaque, probably a clever way of giving a son public gravitas. The frescoes showed priests and worshippers in cheerful colors. When the ash fell in 79, it preserved the temple like a time capsule. You can almost hear the sistrum in your head when you stand in those small rooms and read the painted panels showing Isis receiving offerings and priests carrying the bark. People a world away from the Nile still wanted the river's rhythm. They found it under Vesuvius. Let's touch very lightly the later religious shifts. As Christianity spread, old cults lost state support. Temples closed. Processions changed names. The imagery migrated because that's what imagery does when it wants to live. Mothers holding children remained. Processions to the water remained. Springtime blessings for boats remained. In Mediterranean ports, Our Lady of the Sea became a Marian devotion with boats and flowers that feel like Navagium Isidis with a new soundtrack. Not plagiarism, continuity. People keep what calms them and relabel it for the new group chat. In Egypt, the Coptic Church kept a love for Mary that looks and sounds familiar if you've spent time with Isis. The emphasis on compassion, intercession, and the house as holy space continued. Meanwhile, farther south, in Ethiopian Orthodox liturgy, a cousin of the sistrum still shakes in church. Metal frame, little discs, a bright chiming rhythm. Not because anyone secretly worships Hathor, but because instruments that calm a room keep their jobs. We can let a few small things fall gently onto the table, like objects you'd place in a shrine before bed. A red tayet knot amulet, smooth and slightly worn at the edges, sewn into mummy wrappings or worn around a wrist. A Minat counterweight, beaded and heavy,
flipped by a priestess in Dendera's courtyard to keep the rhythm steady. A bronze mirror with Hathor's face on the handle, polished to a soft shine, reflecting you and everyone who stood here before you, which is how reflection works in old houses. A cypress with Horus on crocodiles, slick with water, put out in the sun to dry before the next anxiety arrives asking for a drink. If you need one more royal detour because the elite are always a bit messy, return briefly to Cleopatra VII's PR. The Roman version turned her into a cautionary tale: sorcery, seduction, feasts with Etruscan couches and questionable decor. Octavian's propaganda had to sell Actium as virtue-defeating vice. The practical truth is that Cleopatra used ISIS branding to knit together a country with a famous past and a nervous present. It worked until Roman ships won. After her, the goddess didn't vanish. She got on more boats and learned new languages. Adaptability was the whole skill set.
And if you prefer quiet domestic stories to imperial fireworks, there's Deir el-Medina again, the worker village with too many receipts. Ostraca record offerings to the Lady of Dendera, requests to the great Isis for help with illness or work disputes, and a steady parade of oracles. People took questions to god statues like they were walking HR departments. Should I take this job? Is this man lying? Can I have my grain back? A tilt of the bark answered. Sometimes the god said no. Egyptians handled it. Someone shook a sistrum anyway and went home to try again. The long afterlife of these goddesses left fingerprints in a lot of unexpected places. Enlightenment salons loved the idea of Isis unveiled, which was really Neith's line filtered through Plutarch. Masonic rituals borrowed Egyptian decor the way a hotel borrows art, for atmosphere. Mozart, in The Magic Flute, gave Sarastro's temple a vaguely Egyptian vibe and slipped in a solemn hymn to Isis unto Cyrus. 18th century Europe adored the fantasy of Egypt as a reservoir of ancient wisdom, even when its Egypt was basically a postcard. The actual goddesses, who'd done 3,000 years of daily work, didn't mind the costume party. They had earned a night off. We can leave most of the modern era alone. Names change, fashion cycles spin. Sometimes people name their baby Isis. Sometimes history makes that difficult for a while. The cistern shows up in museum shops as a plastic toy because someone realized joy is portable. The horns and disc crown get simplified into a clean logo for a spiritual bookstore. The old titles, Mistress of Life, Lady of the West, She Who Hears Prayers, sound new again because the needs never age out. A brief, calm nod to the last hieroglyphs. In 394 CE, a priest named Esmet Akhom at Philae carved an inscription that is, so far, the last known hieroglyphic text. He mentions Isis. It's the end of a system in a handful of carved signs. In 452, a Demotic graffito at the same site says goodbye in the script the accountants loved. The temple went quiet. The island waited. Much later, the Nile rose behind a dam and covered the courtyards. Then 20th century teams moved the whole complex stone by stone to higher ground. Isis changed addresses again. She has always been portable. To end this stretch, take a slow breath and imagine the feeling of the country, Egypt's mood when the festivals went right. The flood came on time. The fields hushed into green. The storehouses filled. Musicians shook sistra under painted stars. Queens stood under heavy crowns and pretended they weren't heavy. In houses all across the floodplain, people set down little cups of beer and a piece of bread on a shelf and said, out loud or not, please and thank you. Seduction in these stories isn't perfume and draped couches. It's the attractive force of order. It's the art of making the right thing easier. Isis gathers the pieces. Hathor tunes the room. Kings last longer when they cooperate. Empires behave better when someone shakes a bronze rattle on the right beat. And when the beat stops for a while, people who remember it keep tapping their fingers until the rhythm returns. We'll keep drifting. Next, we can quietly step into the toolkits and texts, the spells, songs, and little instructions that made this all work in practice without Hollywood lighting. For now, the temple doors are closed, the bark is at rest, and the river draws one long line through the dark.
All right, lamps down to a glow. The room has that imaginary temple smell again. Resin, honey, and the faint suggestion of someone tidying your mood with a soft cloth. Tonight, we're opening drawers. We're taking out the small tools and the quiet papers, the spells, songs, and delicately bossy instructions that let Isis and Hathor do their work in real life. This is the how-to section. The vibe is still bedtime. The tone is still calm. The gods, as always, prefer no shouting. Let's start with the oldest paper trail. It's stone, actually. The pyramid texts. 5th and 6th dynasty kings carved spells inside their pyramids, because apparently if you're going to sleep forever, you also want captions. In those spells, Isis appears early as mourner, magic maker, and throne fixer. She and her sister Nephthys stand at the pharaoh's head and feet like paralegals who know where the real power lives. They cry the right words, wake the right winds, and remind the sky to open politely. It's not cinematic, it's procedural. The universe likes procedures. The coffin texts came later, democratizing the afterlife like a kind bureaucracy. Non-royals could finally get in on the "please do not get lost in the dark" package. Isis and Hathor step into those spells as navigators. Hathor pops up as Lady of the Western Mountain, generous with shade and water. Isis continues as the one who knows the passwords. Think of these as travel checklists with a divine customer service chat. Then you get the Book of the Dead, which is not a book and not about being dead, but we're not renaming it at midnight. It's a customizable set of spells. Families ordered the options they could afford, like a spiritual tapas menu. Isis appears in the Knot spell, the Tayet, red, tied, an amulet sewn into wrappings or worn in life. The spell says, more or less, Isis's blood, Isis's magic, protection now. Clean, confident, and a little bossy. Hathor is present in the Lady of the Sycamore scenes, offering water to the thirsty dead out of a tree like hospitality was invented just for this moment. It probably was. You don't need the spell numbers to sleep, but if your brain keeps a collection, here are 2 gentle anchors. The Tayet Knot spell, often called Book of the Dead 156, asks that the blood of Isis protect the body. The amulet is red for a reason. Red is life, protection, and also a very practical color for fabrics near wine. The Hathor Sycamore vignette appears with spells that soothe the afterlife commute. Hathor is shade, drink, and reassurance. Imagine a divine roadside stand that only sells exactly what you forgot. Let's pull out the Lamentations of Isis and Nephthys. It's a performance text, temple script, not beach-read. 2 women, often priestesses, take the roles of the sisters and sing their grief for Osiris at the festival of Koyak, the late inundation ritual where the god is reassembled, replanted, and quietly green again. The laments are not a scream, they're structured sorrow. Each stanza builds a bridge from loss to return. The festival included making corn mummies, little Osiris figures of earth mixed with grain, watered so they sprouted. It's not subtle. You bury a god, he grows. You hold vigil, he wakes. Isis's song and the green shoots say the same thing. Persistence is a spell.
Koyak is a nice example of how sweet the logistics could be. For days, priests prepared sacred earth. For nights, people recited. On the big day, the wrapped figure was laid to rest with a generous gift basket of incense and bread. Then the new Osiris, sprouted and ready, was unveiled. Farmers liked the symbolism because it was also a planting guide. Queens liked it because it looked like legitimacy with leaves. Everybody went home not exactly festive, but calmer. Not every ritual is meant to sparkle, some are built to exhale with. Now a tool that is basically a multi-tool in relief form, the Sippus of Horus. The big famous one is nicknamed the Metternich Stela, and it's basically a text-heavy dark slab with the child Horus trampling crocodiles, holding snakes, looking like a toddler who discovered the pet store and decided to manage it. The stela carries long spells for protection against bites and stings. The method is elegant. Pour water over the stone, let the spells soak, collect the water, drink, or wash with it. Medicine plus magic. Shared custody. Isis appears in those texts telling the story of her son's poisoning and cure so that anyone with a similar emergency can hitch a ride on the myth. The words do the carrying, the water does the rest. This is therapy in a bowl. There's a companion story, the 7 Scorpiers, that lives on the same shelf in the Egyptian brain as Please Be Kind to Strangers. Isis travels in disguise. A wealthy woman refuses her shelter. The goddess sleeps elsewhere. The Scorpions, offended on her behalf, very loyal, very extra, sting the rich woman's child. Isis heals the child anyway and makes it clear hospitality is not optional. No thunderbolt, just the quiet reset that says compassion outranks all your feelings. People told this story at bedside altars like a lullaby with a lesson. If you're collecting small tools, we can make a soft pile. Tiet, the knot of Isis. Red stone or dyed faience. It looks like an ankh with droopy arms. Protective. Especially for blood and bodies, which makes it a favorite for women in labor, and for burial bandages. Jed, the pillar. Osiris's spine if you're in the mood for anatomy. Stability as an object. Isis is often shown raising it like she's literally re-erecting order. The pun is right there. Egyptians never met a symbol they didn't stack. Sistrum, the rattle. Loop or Nios-shaped metal rods with discs. Shake it to pacify a goddess, to tickle the air into behaving, to ease a room's shoulders down from its ears. Hathor's favorite. Manat, the necklace with a counterweight flipped and swung in rhythm. It's music and adornment in one. Nothing says, "Our festival is on schedule," like a line of priestesses flipping manats with soft authority. Situla, the ritual bucket. Usually bronze, milk, water, wine, whatever a goddess is supposed to sip symbolically today. If you hand one to a statue, you are basically offering, "Please be nourished," and then nourish us. Let's talk pregnancy and childbirth tools gently. Middle Kingdom households used magic wands carved from hippopotamus ivory, also called apotropic wands or knives, with protective beings etched along the curve, Taweret the hippo, Bes the dwarf with lion ears, snakes, cats, and sometimes Hathor faces tucked between. A midwife or mother would trace the wand around a bed or doorway to draw the protective boundary. It sounds like a child's game. It is not. Drawing your line is one of the oldest spells humans know.
Household statues of Taweret and Bes did the heavy lifting day to day, but Hathor and Isis stood behind the scenes like department heads. Hathor's name appears on birthhouses, mamacies, attached to larger temples. Denderas and Edfus are famous, with reliefs of a divine mother giving birth to a divine child under the eyes of midwife deities. The architecture is cute, the theology is strategic. Every royal birth echoes this scene. Queens walk through with a certain relief. If a god's mother got good lighting and help, maybe they will too. If you've ever noticed the Egyptian love of mirrors, that's Hathor's fault in the best way. Bronze mirrors with her face on the handle show up in burials and house shrines. The polished disc is the sun's little sister. Her face at the handle reminds you that beauty is a reflection of good order, not a battle. People probably use them practically, yes. They also use them ritually, in festivals, in awakening the goddess morning rites, in moments when a calm reflection shut down a noisy thought. Speaking of daily habits, the Egyptians wrote recipes on walls. The Temple of Edfu preserves the formula for kifi, that sweet evening incense: honey, raisins, wine, myrrh, frankincense, juniper, cinnamon, and more, ground with hymns and patience. It was burned at night to make the house glad, which is both poetic and precisely the job description. Hathor liked kifi. So did anyone within nose range. The idea that scent can tune a room is older than most religions and smarter than many. The same temple walls preserve music notation only by implication, but the reliefs show harps, lutes, clappers, and sistra in action. Hathor's festivals were sound baths with dance breaks. The point wasn't virtuosity, it was alignment. A city that moves together is a city that remembers how to work. That's governance by groove, and it's older than policy. If you want actual text with your melody, New Kingdom love songs survive on papyri and ostraka, slip of stone, casual and intimate. They invoke Hathor like she's an aunt with a mischievous smile. She led him past me, one poem claims, like the goddess is scheduling meet-cutes. The songs sit at the intersection of flirtation and prayer. Is it a devotion? Is it a crush? The answer is yes. Humans are delightfully consistent. We can dive gently into the Greek magical papyri, PGM if your pillow likes acronyms. These are a grab bag from Roman Egypt, in Greek and demonic, full of spells for protection, attraction, healing, dreams, and basic please be nicer requests. Isis appears constantly. Eritologies, self-hymns where the goddess lists her talents, come blazing through. I am she who arose from herself. I made the sea navigable. I invented letters. I decree laws. I am she who saves. It's a CV delivered as poetry.
A typical PGM spell might direct the user to write holy names on a papyrus strip, knot it with a red thread, hello tie it vibes, anoint with oil, and speak the goddess's names in a string of syllables that look like vocal warm-ups crossed with thunder. Io, Sabaoth, Ardbathio. These voces magicae aren't empty noise. They're standardized effects. The idea is that sound shapes reality if you modulate it right. Isis, as mistress of names, is good with this. She appreciates careful pronunciation and reasonable goals. Aim for protection and clarity. Leave empire to the empire. Demotic magical texts from the London Leiden papyrus add more. Recipes for love filters, dream oracles, binding spells that are ethically iffy but historically honest. Isis gets invoked even when the request is misguided because she's the goddess you call when you want results. Her boundaries are implied more than enforced by the text. The ancient scribes were not your ethics professors. They were freelance problem solvers with ink. The healing papyri, Ebers, Hurst, London Medical, blend herbs and spells with a comfortable lack of modern anxiety about categories. A remedy for a burn might say, O Isis, I have called to the sky has rained fresh water, the Nile has flooded, the heat is cooled. Then apply a poultice of certain plants. The text trusts both actions. You don't have to fight about whether it's just medical or just magical. Your skin doesn't care, it wants relief. Ancient writers understood that belief, rhythm, and plant chemistry collaborate well. If you prefer rituals over recipes, temple liturgies give you the good stuff. Dendera's walls preserve full hymn cycles to Hathor, hymns at dawn, midday, evening. The goddess is praised as Mistress of Jubilation in one stanza and Lady of the Sky in another. The language repeats in soothing loops. You can almost hear the priest's voice land on the epithets like a heartbeat. Philae's inscriptions do similar work for Isis, hymns of praise, descriptions of processions, instructions for how to present offerings and carry the bark. The repeated phrase, she who hears prayers, is not a metaphor. It's the theological equivalent of a service guarantee. Let's drop down into an oracle session because that's practical magic you can visualize. A question is written on an ostrakon. The god's statue is placed in a boat shrine, bark, with carrying poles. Priests shoulder it. The petitioner reads the question aloud. The bearers move, guided by the unseen. A forward tilt means yes. A backward dip means no. Sometimes the statue moves laterally to indicate ask again with better manners. In Thebes, this game played out often. In Greek and Roman era temples, Isis got especially good reviews for prompt answers. If your court case was stuck, you asked her to unstick it. If your neighbor claimed your donkey, you asked her to make the donkey pick you. That last one I'm making up slightly, but statistically, someone definitely tried it. Let's not skip the sacred knot technique because ties are underrated. The tie-it shows up not just as an amulet, but as an action, binding protection to a person, room, or city. In spells for binding demons or disease, knots stand in for control. Isis uses binding to keep grief together, to keep a fetus in place, to keep a river in its bed. Humans imitated that. They knotted red thread around doorways. They tied amulets at wrists and bedposts. The line between jewelry and ritual is blurry by design.
On the perfume shelf, alongside Kaifi, sit oils that carry goddess signatures. Hathor oil is a phrase that appears in ritual lists, probably a perfumed unguent heavy on myrrh and sweetness. Isis's milk as a libation shows up in texts, probably cow's milk in ritual pitchers poured before the goddess's statue. Offerings weren't exotic, they were homey. Beer, bread, onions, flowers, incense. The gods liked simple things arranged with care. Humans do too. That's half the magic. Cosmetics deserve their calm minute. Kohl eyeliner wasn't just fashion. It had antimicrobial properties and reduced glare on sunny days. It also delineated the eye into something almost hieroglyphic, crisp, readable, and ready for a portrait of your soul. Hathor loved mirrors. Isis loved clarity. Lining the eye is practical and poetic. Ancient vanity tables with little cosmetic spoons carved like swimming girls or ducks make it hard to pretend these people weren't fun. Back to music, because it's the one toolkit item that never wears out. The sistrum appears in women's hands on tomb walls from Old Kingdom onward. In New Kingdom banquets, women with perfume cones on wigs play lutes while another shakes a sistrum. You can feel the air moving at the right speed. Hathor's presence is implied by the instrument. At Dendera, rows of Hathor-faced capitals basically tell you, we run on this rhythm. The festival of drunkenness we mentioned earlier, pacifying the eye with red beer, has its own sound profile. Rattle, clap, murmur, nap. No one is driving home after. If you like labels, here's a shelf without shelf of textual genres where Isis and Hathor show. Mortuary spells, pyramid texts, coffin texts, Book of the Dead. Purpose, safe transit, identity management, snacks. Temple liturgies, hymns and scripts at Dendera, Edfu, Philae. Purpose, keep the divine mood stable, keep the calendar alive. Healing incantations, Sippy inscriptions, medical papyri. Purpose, name the problem, tell it a better story, pour water, apply paste. Eretologies, self-proclamations of Isis, often in Greek. Purpose, brand identity, comfort, recruitment, a little flex. Love songs, New Kingdom papyri and ostraka. Purpose, survive being a person with feelings, recruit Hathor as accomplice. Oracular records, questions and answers on ostraka or in temple narratives. Purpose, decision support, HR with incense. Let's slip into a small room and watch a household shrine at work. A wooden naos on a shelf. Inside, a little figure of Isis, throne on head, child on lap. Next to her, a plaque with Hathor's face and cow ears, and maybe a Bess statue that looks like a bulldog in a wig. Someone lights a lamp, puts a small piece of bread in a dish, pours a few drops of beer, and breathes. A woman ties a red cord around her wrist and says the not very secret words that live in her mouth all day. Please keep them safe. It's not dramatic. It doesn't need to be. Effective magic is usually boring to watch.
If you want to see goddess tech go full scale, step into a mamisi during a royal birth. Reliefs show queens touching the divine birthing brick. Yes, a brick. Because Egyptian labor postures were practical and upright.
Deities crowd in like supportive aunties. The 7 Hathors are there, technically a handful of the same goddess, to announce fate and hopefully keep the spoilers gentle this time. Thoth writes in his notebook like the pediatrician you actually trust. Isis supervises. Hathor supplies the breathing. The scene repeats at Dendera, Edfu, Philae. A good tableau repeats. It feels true every time. Some kings got the memo and leaned into the goddess toolkit like responsible adults. Amenhotep III's court produced Kefi recipes, Sekhmet pacification statues by the hundreds. Quantity is also a spell. And festivals that turn seasonal anxiety into structured joy. Horemheb, the cleanup king after Amarna, plowed offerings into temples so hard you can still see the stone. Ramesses II kept Hathor busy with building dedications and made sure Nefertari's afterlife had the best lighting. Ptolemaic rulers doted on Dendera like it was their social calendar. Even grumpy emperors signed off on Navigium Isidis because sailors are voters. The Greek magical papyri give us one more thing that reads modern in a helpful way: dream incubation. You spend the night in a sanctuary, purified, with an offering in place, and ask Isis for a dream that solves your problem. You go to sleep. In the morning, you scribble your dream on a wax tablet and then take action based on what makes sense. Is it psychology? Is it goddess work? It's both. The human nervous system likes frameworks. Isis provided one with clean floors. We'll end this toolkit browse with the smallest thing we keep meaning to mention: names. Isis's power over names isn't a power grab. It's consent culture applied to the cosmos. You ask reality to share its true name, reality agrees when the timing and relationship are right. Then you become responsible for how you use it. Ra gives his true name in one myth. Isis heals him and keeps the world on schedule. The myth is telling you how to handle knowledge. Don't steal it. Don't hoard it. Don't use it to be clever on the internet. Use it to fix the temperature of a world that runs hot too often. Lay the tools back down now. The sistrum on its cloth, the manat hung on a peg, the tayet in a small box that smells like cedar, the mirror face down so it doesn't stare at you while you're trying to sleep, the book that isn't a book closed to its last vignette. The goddess lights are still on, but dim. They never really go out. That's the point. In the next drift, we can let these tools follow people into new languages, how the hymns translated, what survived in whispers, and how very old motifs kept their jobs in late worlds with new names. For now, keep the Kefi imaginary but strong, keep the breathing slow, and let Hathor hold the room while Isis does quiet paperwork where you can't see her, which is, frankly, how you know it's getting done.